Hey, Spartan Nation, I have missed you since our last read aloud. Today I'm going to read chapter 12 from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But before we do that, I want to give some shout outs from some of my former students. One is going into high school, and one is in high school, and they said that they've been following White Station Elementary on Facebook, and they've been listening to the read aloud. And they remember when I read this to them when they were in third grade. So I thought that was sweet. So thank you all for the shout out in the email. So we were talking about the presidents. George Washington was our first president. John Adams was our second president. Thomas Jefferson was our third president. James Madison was our fourth. James Monroe, 5. Sixth president was John Quincy Adams. Seventh president, William H. Harrison. Andrew Jackson, sorry. Martin Van Buren I'm off today, you all. I'm so sorry. Martin Van Buren was 8th, and today's president, our 9th president, William Henry Harrison, he did not even serve a whole term. He didn't even serve a whole year. He died in office. He was the first president to die in the White House, and he died 1 month before he finished his first year in office. We have some students at our school with the last name Van Buren, and I wonder if they're related to Martin Van Buren. And remember, I said that Thomas Jefferson's first vice president was Aaron Burr, a relative of mine. Matter of fact, my great aunt Flora, her middle name was Burr, B-U-R-R. So those are our presidents, and we've talked about some states and capitals. We've talked about Alabama, and the capital of Alabama is Montgomery. That's correct. We've talked about Alaska, and the capital of Alaska, Juneau. We've talked about Arizona, and the capital is Phoenix. Arkansas, the capital is Little Rock. California, the capital is Sacramento. Colorado, the capital is Denver. Connecticut, the capital is Hartford. Delaware, the capital is Dover. And today we're talking about Florida. What is the capital of Florida? I bet Miss Flory knows. She's from Florida. At the end, we'll talk about it. So I will read chapter 12 from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Remember last time the children and Mr. and Mrs. Beaver were trying to get to the stone table to meet Aslan before the White Witch made it, and Edmund had disappeared, and he had made it to the White Witch. And so they were on her sledge, and they were headed to the stone table, but the thaw began. So her spell over Narnia was being canceled out by Aslan being in Narnia. And so her sledge is not going so well over the thaw of the muddiness. And here's chapter 12, Peter's first battle. Who is that? Look who showed up. The Cat in the Hat. He has been hanging around my house. I found him inside this china cabinet earlier, messing around with the crystal, and I told him that he was being naughty. And now he shows up on the outside, and I asked him to sit upright and listen to the story, and he said no, he'd like to read upside down. So be it. All right, Peter's first battle. While the dwarf and the White Witch were saying this, miles away, the beavers and the children were walking on, hour after hour, into what seemed a delicious dream. Long ago, they had left the coats behind, and by now they had even stopped saying to one another, "Look, there's a kingfisher," or "I say bluebells," or "What a lovely smell," or "Just listen to that thrush." Kingfishers and thrushes are birds. They walked on in silence, drinking it all in, passing through patches of warm sunlight into cool green thickets, and out again into the wide, mossy glades, where tall elms raised the leafy roof far overhead, and then into dense masses of flowering currant and among hawthorn bushes where the sweet smell was almost overpowering. Currants are the fruit are little bitty like raisins, When they're dried, they're smaller than raisins, and sometimes you would have them in couscous. If you've ever had couscous, you might have had currants in them, and they're quite delicious. Elm trees are very well known for the shade that they give. They're shade trees, and so it's a really nice, a shady tree. My grandmother used to have 2 elms in her front yard in Texas. They had been just as surprised as Edmund when they saw the winter vanishing and the whole wood passing in a few hours or so from January to May. They hadn't even known for certain, as the witch did, that this is what would happen when when Aslan came to Narnia. But they all knew that it was her spells that had produced the endless winter, and therefore they all knew that this magic spring began that something had gone wrong, and badly wrong, and the witch's schemes. And after the thaw had been going on for some time, they all realized that the witch would no longer be able to use her sledge. After that, they did not hurry so much, and they allowed themselves more rest than longer ones. They were pretty tired by now, of course, but not what I'd call bitter tired, only slow and feeling very dreamy and quiet inside as one does when one is coming to the end of a long day in the open. Susan had a slight blister on one heel. They had left the course of the big river some time ago, for one had to turn a little to the right. That meant a little to the south to reach the place of the stone table. Even if this had not been their way, they couldn't have kept to the river valley once the thaw began, for with all that melting snow, the river was soon in flood, a wonderful, roaring, thundering, yellow flood, and their path would have been under water. And now the sun got low, and the light got redder, and the shadows got longer, and the flowers began to think about closing. "Not long now," said Mr. Beaver, and began leading them uphill across some very deep, springy moss. It felt nice under their tired feet. In a place where only tall trees grew very wide apart, the climb, coming at the end of the long day, made them all pant and blow, and just as Lucy was wondering whether she could really get to the top without another long rest, suddenly they were at the top, and this is what they saw. They were on a green, open space from which you could look down on the forest spreading as far as one could see in every direction, except right ahead. There, far to the east, was something twinkling and moving. "By gum," whispered Peter to Susan, "the sea!" In the very middle of this open hilltop was the stone table. It was a great grim slab of gray stone supported on 4 upright stones. It looked very old, and it was cut all over with strange lines and figures that might be the letters of an unknown language. They gave you a curious feeling when you looked at them. The next thing they saw was a pavilion pitched on one side of an open place. A wonderful pavilion it was, and especially now when the light of the setting sun fell upon it, with sides of what looked like yellow silks and cords of crimson and tent pegs of ivory, and high above it on a pole a banner which bore a red rampant lion fluttering in the breeze, which was blowing in their faces from the far-off sea. While they were looking at this, they heard the sound of music on their right. So another word for crimson is red, another word would be scarlet, and then the tent pegs were ivory, and ivory comes from the tusks of elephants or walrus, and it also talked about, and now tent pegs are made out of metal spikes, and sometimes they would be made out of wooden stakes as well. So they heard the music, and turning in that direction, they saw what they had come to see. Aslan stood in the center of a crowd of creatures who had grouped themselves round him in the shape of a half-moon. They were tree women there, and well women, dryads and naiads, and as they used to be called in our world, who had stringed instruments. It was they who had made the music. There were 4 great centaurs. The horse part of them was like a huge English farm horse, and the man part was like the stern of beautiful giants. There was also a unicorn and a bull with the head of a man and a pelican and an eagle and a great dog, and next to Aslan stood two leopards, of whom one carried his crown and the other his standard. But as for Aslan himself, the beavers and the children didn't know what to do or say when they saw him. People who have not yet been in Narnia sometimes think that a thing cannot be good and terrible all at the same time. If the children had ever thought so, they were cured of it now. For when they tried to look at Aslan's face, they just caught the glimpse of the golden mane and the great royal, solemn, overwhelming eyes, and then they found they couldn't look at him and went all trembly. "Go on," whispered Mr. Beaver. "No," whispered Peter, "you first." "No, sons of Adams before animals," whispered Mr. Beaver again. And here's the picture of Aslan with his troop of people. It must have been an awesome sight. "Susan," whispered Peter, "what about you? Ladies first." "No, you're the eldest," whispered Susan. And of course, the longer they went on doing this, the more awkward it felt. Then at last Peter realized that it was up to him. He drew his sword and raised it to a salute, and hastily saying to the others, "Come on, pull yourselves together," he advanced the line and said, "We have come, Aslan." "Welcome, Peter, son of Adam," said Aslan. "Welcome, Susan and Lucy, daughters of Eve. Welcome, he beaver and she beaver." His voice was deep and rich and somehow took the fidgets right out of them. They now felt glad and quiet, and it didn't seem awkward to them to stand and say nothing. "But where is the fourth?" asked Aslan. "He has tried to betray them and joined the White Witch, Aslan," said Mr. Beaver, and then something made Peter say, "That's partly my fault, Aslan. I was angry with him, and I think that helped him to go wrong." And Aslan said nothing either to excuse Peter or to blame him, but merely stood looking at him with his great unchanging eyes. And it seemed of all them that there was nothing to be said. "Please, Aslan," said Lucy, "can anything be done to save Edmund?" "All shall be done," said Aslan, "but it may be harder than you think." And then he was silent again for some time. Up to the moment Lucy had been thinking how royal and strong and peaceful his face looked. Now it suddenly came into her head that he looked sad as well. But next minute that expression was quite gone. The lion shook his mane and clapped his paws together. Terrible paws, thought Lucy. If he didn't know how to velvet them, and said, "Meanwhile, let the feast be prepared. Ladies, take these daughters of Eve to the pavilion and minister to them." When the girls had gone, Aslan laid his paw, and though it was velveted, it was very heavy, on Peter's shoulder and said, "Come, son of Adam, and I will show you the far-off site of the castle where you shall be king." And Peter, with his sword still drawn in his hand, went with the lion to the eastern edge of the hilltop. There was a beautiful sight met their eyes. The sun was setting behind their backs. That meant that the whole country below them lay in the evening light, forest and hills and valleys, and winding away like a silver snake, the lower part of the great river. And beyond all this, miles away, was the sea, and beyond the sea, the sky, full of clouds, which were just turning rose color with reflection of the sunset. But just where the land of Narnia met the sea, in fact at the mouth of the great river, there was something on the little hill shining. It was shining because it was a castle, and of course the sunlight was reflected from all the windows which looked toward Peter in the sunset. But to Peter it looked like a great star resting on the seashore. "That, O man," said Aslan, "is Cair Paravel, of the 4 thrones, in one of which you must sit as king. I show it to you because you are the firstborn, and you will be high king over the rest." And once more Peter said nothing, for at that moment a strange noise woke the silence suddenly. It was like a bugle, but richer. "It is your sister's horn," said Aslan to Peter in a low voice, so low that it was almost a purr, if it is not disrespectful to think of a lion purring. For a moment Peter did not understand. Then, when he saw all the other creatures start forward and heard Aslan saying, with a great wave of his paw, "Back, let the prince win his spurs," he did understand, and set off running as hard as he could to the pavilion, and there he saw a dreadful sight. The Naiads and Dryads were scattering in every direction. Lucy was running toward him as fast as her short legs would carry her, and her face was as white as paper. Then he saw Susan make a dash for the tree and swing herself up, followed by a huge gray beast. At first Peter thought it was a bear. Then he saw that it looked like an Alsatian, though it was far too big to be a dog. Then he realized it was a wolf standing on its hind legs, with its front paws against the tree trunk, snapping and snarling. All the hair on its back stood up on end. Susan had not been able to get higher than the second big branch. One of her legs hung down so that her foot was only an inch or 2 above the snapping teeth. Peter wondered why she did not get higher, or at least take a better grip. Then he realized that she was just going to faint, and that if she fainted, she would fall. Peter did not feel very brave. Indeed, he felt he was going to be sick. But that made no difference to what he had to do. He rushed straight up to the monster and aimed a slash of his sword to its side. The stroke never reached the wolf. Quick as lightning, it turned round, its eyes flaming and its mouth wide open in the howl of anger. If it had not been so angry that it simply had to howl, it would have got him by the throat at once. As it was, though, all this happened too quickly for Peter to think at all. He had just time to duck down and plunge his sword as hard as he could between the brute's 4 legs into its heart. Then came a horrible, confused moment, like something in a nightmare. He was tugging and pulling, and the wolf seemed neither alive nor dead, and its bared teeth knocked against his forehead, and everything was blood and heat and hair. A moment later he found that the monster lay dead, and he had drawn his sword out of it and was straightening his back and rubbing the sweat off his face and out of his eyes. He felt tired all over. Then after a bit Susan came down the tree. She and Peter felt pretty shaky when they met, and I won't say that there wasn't kissing and crying on both sides, but in Narnia no one thinks any of the worse for that. "Quick, quick," shouted the voice of Aslan. "Centaurs, eagles, I see another wolf in the thicket, there behind you. He has just darted off. After him, all of you. He will be going to his mistress. Now is your chance to find the witch and rescue the 4th son of Adam." And instantly, with the thunder of hoofs and beating of wings, a dozen or so of the swiftest creatures disappeared in the gathering darkness. Peter, still out of breath, turned and saw Aslan close at hand. "You have forgotten to clean your sword," said Aslan. It was true. Peter blushed when he looked at the bright blade and saw that it was smeared with the wolf's hair and blood. He stooped down and wiped it clean on the grass, and then wiped it quite dry on his coat. "Hand it to me and kneel, son of Adam," said Aslan. And when Peter had done so, he struck him with the flat of the blade and said, "Rise up, Sir Peter Wolfsbane, and whatever happens, never forget to wipe your sword." And that is the end of chapter 12. We'll read chapter 13 next time, and going back to our quiz. The capital of Florida is Tallahassee. Until next time, bye-bye. He's still hanging there.